GM friends, and welcome to the Metacast Crypto Corner brought to you by Naavik. I'm your host, Nicolas Vereecke, or Nico for short, and today I'm joined by John and Karel from the Treasure/Magic team, who are currently busy building the Treasureverse. Treasure DAO is described as building the building blocks of a universe of game worlds connected by composable NFTs and the Magic token. And so, as a little bit of context around this, as many of you know, I'm a big fan of loot, and so a few weeks after loot was dropped, I saw this project called Treasure that asked me to stake some loot NFTs and some adventure gold, and I was like, yeah, why not? Didn't look at it for a while, and then a few months later, it seemed that I was holding tokens of a project that people are calling a decentralized Nintendo, consisting of the console, play-to-earn games from other developers, and a launchpad for these games. And then also a marketplace where you can trade assets as NFTs. And so Magic is a currency that ties everything within this Treasureverse together. All games being built utilize Magic, and the NFTs can only be bought with Magic. And it also looked like Treasure has a very dedicated community, because I had people email me to talk about Treasure and to get you guys on. So here we go. Due to popular demand, let's talk about what you guys are doing. John or Karel, can someone give me a very high level view of what Treasure is doing? And I'm also interested to get the origin story, where did this idea originate? What sparked the idea of building a decentralized Nintendo? And what is a decentralized Nintendo? I'd love to learn more.
Yeah, so like you, I am a really big fan of loot. I hadn't seen anything like it before in the space, and was really inspiring for me. And there are a lot of people making derivatives when loot first came out. And my thinking was we should try and do it with resources. So instead of distributing adventure gear, I'm from a decentralized finance background, and a lot of the teammates are. So we thought we'll just do the same formula where we create these mechanisms that don't have a context. So economic building blocks devoid of a game, to see if a larger game universe could be built. Then with Magic, as you mentioned, we allowed people from multiple communities to farm it, with the idea being if loot can create a video game in a bottom-up way, building it, then we can create a network of metaverses, or something like a video game console using a token in the same formula. So the way it works is we're trying to build an economic layer to a network of metaverses rather than a VR, AR, or particular metaverse. So we develop these economies that mostly are just bridges between worlds. So resources that they fight over, they share emissions of, and using this joint economic structure, the idea is that we can build a cradle that a lot of games can be built on top of. And over time, what ends up happening is the Magic token, which is distributed across many worlds and used to support builders on a variety of platforms. The DAO can just continue diverting emissions towards the most successful products, or new ones that it wants to bootstrap. And it turns into this sort of nimble organization that uses the Magic token, which is a fantasy resource that's emitted into these metaverses, as a way to sort of guide organizational priorities and just lead to further growth of the DAO.
How should I think about this? Is this like one big MMO, or how do you describe this in terms that your traditional gamer would understand?
Exactly, right. So for us, the very important piece is the decentralized metaverse. So we think the metaverse it isn't a product that a corporation makes and then you buy for a specific price and then they do the maintenance of it. Mm-hmm. A metaverse, in our mind, is a community-made story that has an underlying economic framework as opposed to a visual one. So these are stories that people build through, lore, plots, game loops, things like that. And over time, the community can shift, and the metaverse can actually shift. And so the boundaries between these places, these worlds, is very thin. They can bridge extremely easily because they're just stories that are being constructed. And we think that this decentralization is what separates us from other metaverses, because we can create an underlying framework where all of the games, and not just games, but like land, NFTs, characters, all of the ideas can just sit on this larger, not map, but framework. And yeah, we think that's what makes us unique.
Okay, so Treasure is a framework with a bunch of primitives, an economic layer that can then be used as a foundation for games to be built on top of. Does that make
Exactly.
sense? Okay.
Right. So magic is the central token. We think of it as like the money or store of value across these worlds, because as more worlds get added to our larger network of metaverses, it becomes increasingly scarce, and the emission curve is also designed so it becomes more hard to accumulate over time. But there's also other resources called treasures, and these are just these can be native to a particular metaverse, or they can kind of share emissions of specific kinds across worlds. And through those, that's how these worlds establish relationships, is through commerce.
That's fascinating. And so you would call magic what other MMOs would call gold, right? It is just this one currency that is used everywhere as this main way to transfer value.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's not on a server, there's no company housing it. It's a decentralized asset governed by a DAO.
Okay. And so
if I can just quickly jump in, I think one analogy and something to frame this well is like, treasure and magic, like we're the magical sort of river weaving between the parts and infusing the ecosystem with magic. And so all of the things that John mentioned, like we're kind of flowing in between worlds, between metaverses, between those stories and the lore that's being created, and fueling it with the kind of economic model to power it.
All right. I think I'm starting to grasp this more. And so all of that you're building, does that exist? That full economic layer, is that fully on the blockchain, or is there stuff that you are building that is also not on top of the blockchain?
No, for now, all of our games. And so Bridge World is like our main game, and you can kind of think of it as like a tabletop game. It doesn't have a normal front end, but it's fully on chain. All of the art will be on chain, and we're introducing new resources, types of assets that'll also be on chain. And our little metaverse is Bridge World, and then Smallverse, which is the Small Brains collection. These things all started because we initially were building in the Loot universe and was hoping that Loot would adopt us as their currency, and also for N and A Gold. When that didn't happen, we just started making our own, and now we're finding other builders to come in and expand on this universe with us.
And so you have, then you've broken off from the Lootverse. There's no ties there at this point anymore.
We're trying to do something down the road, I think, with them, but they chose A Gold as their official currency. So for right now, we're doing separate things. Yeah.
Okay. And so is your objective right now, on the long run, maximizing the value of magic? And is that like the common goal that everyone within the Treasureverse shares?
Yeah, exactly. Magic is the thing that powers our organization and all of these worlds. And we've designed it so we have a marketplace that's transacted right now solely in magic. And we take a pretty high royalty, 5%, to support the DAO. So what ends up happening is it's this flywheel where the growth of our products our worlds leads to a lot more transactions. And then the DAO is recouping its native token, which we use to not invest back in ourselves, but in new builders and new games, stories, whatnot. And with that, we're just spreading it out to more places. Magic is the thing that connects all of the builders. So our thesis is that in the long term, we'll see these DAOs scaling larger than blockchains. You'll see them on multiple blockchains. They'll even be in some like resembling Web 2 enterprises, and they'll grow to be brands. And you see NFTs like Azuki teasing the idea of maybe becoming a clothing manufacturer. So for us, we see this as a launch pad. NFTs are a way to start developing native Web3 brands and products like games. And Magic is the thing that enables all of that in the organizational level.
Okay. So if I understand this correctly, and feel free to tell me that I'm wrong. It seems like there are games. These games incentivize the trading of assets in the marketplace, on which there is a quite high 5% royalty that the Treasure DAO takes, which then is used to incentivize or support other game developers to also build games that also incentivize trading. And so that's then a loop that just keeps on growing.
Right. Yeah. And not just games too, right? Like we're exploring building our own blockchain right now and seeing what that will look like. So that would be a good use case to invest in builders who want to build blockchain around Magic. And then later, if we continue to be successful, our organization will grow to the point where it's making what people would call real world products. And we want to put Magic in the hands of those builders also, so that everyone remains aligned to this common goal.
And if I can just add to that, so we have the 5% royalties that are for the projects that we had initially seeded and bootstrapped from the ground up. So Bridge World, Small Brains, Smallverse, all of those are kind of following that 5% royalty model. All of the ecosystem projects that have come out of the community, 2.5% go back to the DAO. The rest of it, whether it's 2.5, which was the initial model, which has since kind of expanded to be freely controlled by the creators, a lot of them starting off as free mints, go back to their projects to really help fuel their operations and as they grow their project as well.
Okay, so there's a kind of revenue share between the original Treasure DAO and then the builders of the games themselves.
You got it.
Yeah. Okay, that's really fascinating. And so, before we go into the games, because I'm curious what kind of experience exists right now and where you see this going, can you talk to me a few of the economic primitives you've built? So, as far as I understand right now, there's Magic, which is this fungible token that is the lifeblood of your ecosystem. You've provided a marketplace within the Treasure ecosystem as well that can be used to trade NFTs. You have different types of NFTs. Could you tell me a bit more about those, and then also more stuff that you've built that you provide to the games that you're supporting?
Yeah, sure. So we're really young. We're only 7 months old, so we're just beginning to explore these things. But treasures themselves the different kinds are kind of fungible still at this point, because they're mostly just used for crafting. And there are some, like our rarest ones called Grin and Honeycomb, that people put in a special category. But we haven't really seen the differentiation at the level of like treasure's utility that we think will happen later. So for now, they're mostly just crafting tools. Mm-hmm. And then we've also, a big thing in DeFi is how do you keep liquidity for a token high? And this has been a struggle for a lot of protocols. And we've seen things like Olympus Pro come along to try and create deeper liquidity, so that there's a phenomenon in DeFi called rug pulling, where someone will pull all of the liquidity after manipulating the prices, and then people just get really hurt by this phenomenon. So we want to build DeFi with a different skin. So LP tokens, which are used to represent one's proportional ownership of a liquidity pool, you actually get back an NFT through Uniswap v3. So we want to build these items as in-game assets, fantasy assets, that the user has no idea that they're actually contributing to liquidity and participating in these DeFi protocols. So we've started with balancer crystals, are actually an LP token. So it's really early days. These are like the basic things we're exploring right now. And then later, we've created these hooks, like Bridge World will have a very established economy, so other people can come along. And the way I think it's going to play out is that communities have to agree on what their metaverses are. So when two metaverses collide, there has to sort of be a handshake between communities about value, what's fungible between these worlds, and things like that. So we're just fleshing out our world as in depth as we can to create ways for other people to collaborate with us.
It is it's impressive what you've been able to build over these past 7 months. And I mean, if we have the time, I'd love to go into the differences between treasure as an ecosystem and loot as an ecosystem. But before that, I'd like to double click on something you said, which I find very interesting. So you said you essentially gamified essential DeFi activities from users. So if I understand you correctly, and I'm going to just throw it out there, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong or if it's correct. An LP pool, a liquidity pool, is a way for anyone to purchase a token. And so in your case, if you want people to be able to buy the Magic token, there has to be a Ethereum and Magic pool that's filled with both ETH and Magic, so people can, if they want to buy Magic, put ETH in, get some Magic back, and then the other way around. And so you give people NFTs if they provide liquidity to that pool, and then these NFTs have utility within the game, so they can use it to play. And then, but that would also mean that at some point you could redeem your NFT and get back to your liquidity. Is that how it works?
Right, exactly. So a liquidity pool is, if we want to have decentralized market makers, someone has to come forward and put, in the case of Uniswap, it's equal amounts in terms of value. They have to put equal amounts of two assets forward to say, I will make the trades here, buys and sells. I will make the buy and sell orders with my liquidity. So it's really important to have deep liquidity, especially for the native token. So when you add liquidity to Uniswap v3, you get back this NFT. And the reason there are NFTs in Uniswap is that everyone has separate parameters. So you choose the point at which you're no longer going to make the market. So if Magic has had some horrible exploit and then it's going to zero, you've already got this parameterized where you're no longer going to provide liquidity if Magic drops below a certain price. So LP positions are actually NFTs technically. And so what we did is we just put a skin on it where users are actually, as you were saying, they're passing back and forth LP tokens. They're actually passing back the protocol's liquidity in the form of these game assets that have utility. And the really neat thing in my mind about using normal DeFi constructs and putting them in GameFi is that GameFi has much more stickiness than a DeFi protocol. Because what we saw in DeFi Summer is that someone else is just going to come along and fork your protocol and the token, and there's nothing really anchoring a person to a protocol. But we see loyalty when things like brands, entertainment, gaming come along. And GameFi allows us to use our imagination to invent all kinds of interesting things that people want to own and collect and participate in. So the search in DeFi Summer was, how do we create a reward big enough so these protocols can have stickiness? And they weren't really able to do it. But in GameFi, we can, because we create experiences that people want to continue participating in. As part of that, we will require them to contribute to the health of the protocol, like by providing liquidity.
Okay, two reactions to what you said. One is you mentioned you wanted to give an example of when the relation between ETH and Magic gets out of whack because of an event, and you had the perfect chance to just say, once this podcast comes out and everyone realizes how amazing Magic is and the price triples. But I'll let that slide for now. And then my second point was that I have been ranting quite a lot about people using the word GameFi around blockchain games. But in this case, it actually makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate this and your use of that, and it's very, very apt in this situation. And actually, honestly, like, this makes a lot of sense, and I really like that. And I think that's from what my understanding now, something we should see way more moving forward.
Thanks. Yeah, we're really excited about this. Right now, it's still very academic because we haven't had a chance to really build out the full economy. But we have a PhD, economist with a PhD on staff, and we also consult with others like business professors. And we really think that like a year in, when this is like really well built out, it won't be as theoretical, and it'll be just like the best way for a builder to want to participate in GameFi or whatever term you would prefer besides that one. Like
Mhm.
there are inherent advantages to being part of a network of builders. They can help bootstrap your community because we can just divert users towards new products, either by like allowing their items to be farmed in world. You can even farm whitelist spots. And then we can also just, the more unsavory parts of, building a game, which is sometimes your game fails.
Mhm.
And in NFTs, it's like very hard to know when to walk away from a project. People have bought into it, and there's this expectation sometimes that you continue working on it forever. And the value of the network is that failed games can just be incorporated into the war in some way, and we can transition them out in a way that's the least destructive to the community and the builders. So we think that over time, this model will just bring in lots of people who want to build with others.
That's makes a ton of sense. Could you tell me about the games? Because we're in this podcast focused on gaming, and a lot of people listening will be are very critical of the current generation of blockchain games. I'm curious, I'm assuming, well, as you said, you've been building for 7 months, right? So we don't expect, GTA 5 on Treasure. But I'd love to know, like, the current generation of games. You've built a few, I saw. Can you give some examples about what the dynamics are, how they tie into the economic layer that you've built with Treasure? And I'd also love to get your vision on where you see this going, like in the best case scenario almost.
Yeah, for sure. I can let Karel speak to Bridge World. I was just going to mention really fast, like, we built a lot in 7 months. So we built a marketplace on Arbitrum, and we were mostly focused on infrastructure because when we moved to L2, we had the belief that eventually most all games and NFT trading will be happening on L2 because it'll just be prohibitively expensive on L1. So when we went to Arbitrum, there was no infrastructure. There wasn't even an NFT viewer for 1155s. So we built the marketplace, and we've done, on some days we were doing 10% of OpenSea's volume with just 2 collections. And, Small Brains did hundreds of million in volume, I believe, and the same for our Legions collection. And yeah, those were our big accomplishments in the first 7 months. But I'll let Karel actually speak to the games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to stress that while we've been building for 7 months, I think we've been able to mobilize a community to build in parallel with us. We have the core games that again sort of seeded the initial thesis of the decentralized video game console and the initial cartridges, if you will. But that said, we've since spawned a number of other games and cartridges to build, which have all come from the community. We've touched on it a little bit, but I think going back to Bridge World, if Treasure DAO incubates games and supercharges their growth with magic and resources, then Bridge World is what mobilizes the economy, and that gives the resources value, builds the DeFi infrastructure for them, and then ultimately it provides games, the other cartridges in our ecosystem, with a common economic framework through which they can integrate, interact, and then compete with one another. But ultimately, the name of the game is that it's a strategic commerce, trade, and domination game, which sits at the center of the Treasure ecosystem. It focuses on resource acquisition and is very much fueled by social coordination, and then there are elements of geopolitics to it. So guilds and other games in the ecosystem acquire users and resources. They create and forge items and consumables, and then deploy them strategically in contest over harvesters, which are a upcoming game mechanic which we are baking in, which are ultimately magic staking farms with concentrated yields. So there's a huge focus on that sort of social coordination and group dynamics, how communities operate and work against or with each other at the user, guild, and global level. And so if I double click into each of those, at the user level, there are ways for, them to send out their NFTs, which we call them legions, on quests. They can craft and create new items, consumables. They can summon and create other NFTs as well, other sort of legions within that class. At the guild level, they can coordinate and compete for emissions, and we're seeing a lot of cartridges actually come up that are coordinating together as a way for them to accumulate magic and ultimately send that into what we're calling the Atlas mine to accumulate more. So ultimately, it does go back to that motto of like everyone is fighting for magic, and it's this scarce and extremely valuable resource that everybody wants. If I click into the global level sort of dynamics, the aggregate staking of magic in the mine really powers up Bridge World. Magic is what ultimately powers all things at Treasure, and if there isn't enough of it being staked, it freezes time in the game, and so this can lead to really interesting dynamics that we can kind of play out, and touches on a lot of what John had mentioned. And so I think counterbalancing all of this stuff, it may seem like it is a lot to sort of digest, but I think it's ultimately kind of bringing everything together, and sort of this motto of complexity that I think wrapped into a game that fuels and powers everything.
Yeah, and if I could just add on there, sorry, that's great. I completely agree with all that. And then in terms of like the larger vision, the longer term one, if I was speaking to a Web2 game developer who was interested in Web3, Ethereum is going to one day be a multi-trillion-dollar technology. And it actually started because of World of Warcraft, or this is the joke at least, that Vitalik Buterin, who invented Ethereum, had his WoW weapon seized because it's on a centralized server. And he was so frustrated with this, he built a world computer where your assets could not be seized because it was housed on a decentralized network. And so, over time, these NFTs right now, they've gone kind of parabolic, so to speak, and their prices are insane. But the real value of an NFT is just signaling things you're interested in it, letting a community tap certain people who've been very good stewards. So we'll see these things not as they'll become extremely popular, not as tradable items, but just demonstrating, just parts of a community. And I think game developers, when they see that that's the future of NFTs, will be like, oh, wow, this is a way we can deal with toxicity, because we want to give badges to users who act in pro-social ways. And then you can't just burn your account and go make a new one, because if you lose all of those badges, which represent the contributions you've made to the metaverse. So that's a good positive incentive to not be toxic. And then, just pure developers, you have all this data on chain about what your users like, what they've also played in the past. So from an advertising perspective, you want all of your users to be using blockchain gaming. So that's kind of where I see Treasure going in the long term, is to be on the forefront of these non-tradable NFTs that help support the growth of the business.
And do you see, so for the moment, all of the gaming happens on chain, right? So you provide a thin client that people access through the browser to interact with the game. How do you see, do you see any off-chain games, like more Twitch-based games ever live within the Treasure ecosystem?
We want to explore lots of ways that Magic can kind of be distributed to new places, new revenue streams. And right now, so Bridge World will always be a tabletop game to some extent, where it doesn't involve that many moves, so to speak, or transactions, so it can be on Arbitrum. But when we build traditional games, and we just entered into an agreement with Strider DAO. Andrew Green has worked in the video game industry for many years and is helping us along with some advisors. We're building out our first game using the Magic and Treasures economy. But so for things like that require a lot of transactions, it's not feasible to do it on even layer 2. And we've seen on Polygon, for instance, Polygon has broken more than once because of a game. The Stardew Valley clone, the name's escaping me right now, actually shut down Polygon. So these things need to move to like higher throughput chains, and we want to do it on Cosmos, where you can have the same security, but you can have functionally zero transaction costs. And you can even literally do it where there's zero gas, because if there's a level of yield earning built into user activity, then they can just be borrowing against their yield for gas. So they don't pay anything. I mean, there are kinds of like crazy things that you can do when you move off layer 1 Ethereum, and we're just exploring those now.
Yes.
Yeah, and the I think that the universe of games that are being built out, I think they can really take any shape or form. I think there's as long as there are sort of deep integrations with Treasure and sort of the model that we're building out, Magic, the use of the resources, which ultimately kind of can be brought into their worlds. We're very much open to anyone kind of coming to the table. If I double click on Strider, I think this is really interesting for us because we're teaming up with them and a former lead designer from one of the world's leading MMORPGs. I can't say the name, but really it's this goal of like building up a community first, kind of bottom up AAA NFT and Web3 game studio. And I think we're seeing more of this as the space matures. They're veterans of the gaming industry. From folks like the audience that would be listening here, and they've created a ton of incredible successes. I think they're coming from places like EA, Rockstar Games, Square Enix. They've had a hand in building games like Dead Space, GTA San Andreas, like Red Dead Redemption. So it's great to kind of have these more and more of these incredibly talented people come to the table, and for us to kind of form that partnership with them. I mean, it's a really humbling and bullish sign for us at Treasure, as we work together to build what we see as the future of sort of the ecosystem. We're going to see more kind of AAA gaming experiences and really move away from, I think, what has been the meta for a long time, which is kind of the financialization of it, and while really important, what will keep people around will be the delight and the social kind of dynamics of it is what we see as the future.
That's really interesting. Before we talk about the incentivization of game builders, because I'm very, very interested in that as well, I'd love to get your thoughts on shared resources within games. So if I understand correctly, you have Magic, being used within each game. Is Magic emitted within games? Can people like play a game and then earn Magic? And are there other resources that are also shared between games?
Yeah, so that's the idea, is that Magic is spread across many worlds, and then the DAO over time decides where to send it. So it's dynamically emitted. And then, it's a store of value token where, gold is a store of value across lots of societies, but we each have native monies and even other things that kind of function like money. So local worlds will also have those. And yeah, it's possible that there are treasures that are emitted in multiple metaverses. We would definitely like to explore that more. We're easing into this just because the integrations, the more complicated they get, if you miscalibrate it has pretty bad consequences. So we're starting slowly, where Magic just exists in Bridge World, and then there's this it's an NFT project I founded called Small Brains, and so the Small Brains will be able to earn Magic in the next few months, and that's like the first integration, along with Seed of Life, which is another core product for Treasure. That we're slowly introducing Magic into those worlds and then easing into deeper economic integrations.
Yeah, and if I can quickly add to that, so we have a sort of an ecosystem integration framework, which does sort of outline steps, and again, happy to go into this in more detail, but really for other game developers, cartridges that are soon to be built, for them to seek magic emissions and also treasure NFTs to be woven into their game mechanics. So that's something that we're beginning to lean into a lot more. I think as really to grow the pie, right? And I think that's ultimately the name of the game for us. If I look back at Bridge World, and this is where I think the role of our economists really plays a really important role, is really to ensure there's balance in the world. And I think one thing that we have discussed a lot and are building towards is kind of a treasure trade union of sorts, where we have a framework for allowing games to opt in and opt out of shared drop rates and common inflation rates for tiers of different items. And so this way games can integrate items from one another, for things like crafting, recipes, and so there are guarantees over the inflation rates of all these items. And so it's a really interesting way for us to bring really everything into the mix, and goes really into the whole name behind Bridge World, ultimately being the world that bridges everything together.
That's really interesting. And so that trade union would be in charge of balancing everything then, I guess.
Exactly. And finding ways for us to incorporate, not just, the NFTs that we've created at Treasure, but also in other cartridges that may come out as well.
One idea that I've had, because I've been thinking about what you're building and other projects are working on as well, building this shared economic layer with shared resources within different games. And I don't know if you thought of this. I'd love to have your opinion on this, where you get games to bid on emissions of resources. Using in your case magic, maybe, where they pay magic to be able to emit another resource. Is that something that crossed your mind?
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a cool idea.
Okay, to explore. Anyway, you have been using the word cartridge a few times, and I know you're building the Nintendo, and Nintendo is a console. Could you explain a bit more, like what you mean by cartridge? Is this like a thing? Is it an NFT, or is it just the name you use for a game?
Yeah, that is more of a way for us to kind of I guess organize the collections and metaverses being put together. I'd make that synonymous to a metaverse, but within kind of our context as the console, games or metaverses or cartridges like Bridge Worlds, like Smalls, of which they may contain multiple collections and different contracts that are associated to that.
Okay, I get that. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. This was all, super interesting. I learned a lot. I'd like to have your thoughts on the difference between what you did with Treasure and what's happening with Loot. So I'm following Loot. There's stuff happening, but it doesn't seem to happen at the same pace as is being done with Treasure. Why do you think that is? Is that because there's Loot? There's no one actually leading this, and you guys have a core team that's actually pushing this forward?
In my mind, there are a couple reasons. I just wanted to say I'm a massive fan of Loot and will support the project however I can. I think Dom, who invented it, invented something that, the idea itself is so incredibly powerful. When I first heard it and really understood it, it was as powerful as when I first really understood what Ethereum is. But you can also go up to someone who knows nothing about crypto or NFTs and just explain basically what Loot is. And everyone I've done this to, family members, they're like, "Oh, that's interesting." People just get it immediately, which is that's a rare invention. And but the problem, I think it was missing one thing, which is the social coordination tool. So we kind of think of Treasure as it's almost like a community maintained myth. And there has to be a way for the community to agree on what actually exists in this world and how it changes. And so magic is the token that can be used to basically signal what Treasure believes is part of its metaverse, or like how the story is changing, and Loot doesn't have that. There is no way for the community to agree on what actually is part of Loot. And Vitalik, when he was talking about it, said, "Oh, this is like a blockchain because anyone can just build on top of it." But blockchains actually subsidize what is the truth, or and then they punish people for. But anywho, that it has a positive incentive in the form of the block reward. And that's what metaverses need, and that's what Magic does. It allows Treasure to continue supporting the development of the metaverse by distributing the native token to people who are actually building it. And the other second problem was that we are a community-made project. Karel, who's now our COO, so to speak. There's in Web3 the job titles are a little looser, but he came in as a community member first. He built Treasure tools, and my co-founder Garp also started as a community member, our product lead for Bridge World. Nearly everyone I just cold approached us to work on the project. And I attribute that to, Dom Hoffman, who founded Loot, also founded Vine, I think it was, or maybe it was Twitch. Yeah, it was Vine.
Vine, yeah.
Yeah, so he's kind of a pseudo celebrity, and that makes a bottom up culture kind of problematic when the person at the very the person who founded the thing is already pretty famous. So who wants to disagree with him? And I kind of empathize with that situation he probably found himself in when he seemed to be backing away at times so the community could step forward. But then it's like there's, they already trusted what he was going to say is what should be done. So then nothing gets done. I don't know. I kind of observed that happening and then felt grateful for being an unknown builder myself that was trying to build this project because it allowed the community to really step to the forefront a lot sooner than is happening with Loot.
Mm-hmm. Karel, when you and I spoke a few days ago, you told me that you previously worked in a lot of fast-paced environments in the Web2 world, and now you're working in a decentralized way within Web3, part of a DAO. You probably don't know the faces and full names of half of the people you work with on a daily basis. What are kind of the takeaways you brought with you, and what are some of the key differences between working in Web2 and Web3 when it comes to building games?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we at Treasure, we've been doing our best actually to try and turn on video at the very least, so we can see our faces. But yeah, I mean, I think it's been an interesting journey for me personally, and I think for a lot of people coming from Web2. I mean, I think there's a lot of learning and unlearning of habits that might have stuck around then, and I think coming from a world where there's a lot more process, a lot more, I'd say, kind of structure, and leaning into kind of more of that bottom-up, community-first sort of ethos that we hold at Treasure, and where we all sort of started from, and where I personally got into Treasure. I think has been pretty incredible. I mean, it kind of brings to light the ability for us to empower people who are not, quote unquote, officially part of the core team, if you will, to get up there and just start building and find ways to contribute, because we ultimately all have a stake in it, especially if you own Magic or an NFT. And I think that's a one big thing. You don't feel the same level of incentivization if you are a shareholder. If you own the stock of Tesla or something like that. I think there's that sort of incentive model to contributing, which is lacking, which we have in Web3. And yeah, I mean, I think it's bringing a lot of the operations, the scaling, at least for me and my role into this. I think a lot of NFT and Web3 projects right now, especially in kind of the gaming space. I think there's we have a big team of developers, but eventually if you kind of make it, you celebrate a ton of success, and ultimately you find yourself yourself in a place where, if to reach that next level and you find yourself with a ton more funding, you really have to grow sustainably and in a way that, helps set you up for the long term. So, I've been here formally full time for, I think, since the end of March. And, even since then, I think we've brought in 10, 15 people onto kind of the core team. And so there's just that mode of building and shipping, which, we I think projects should never lose. But at the same time, you have to inject some of that rigor of, having good processes, having, sort of accountability and being able to build cohesively as, a unit to try and get things done. And that's happening kind of at the core level, but then adding this other layer on top of it where we also want to work very closely and kind of shoulder to shoulder with the community. And that's a dynamic that, I think needs to be proven out and, is completely different from Web 2.
When talking about the community, as I said, I'm impressed with how many people have talked to me about Treasure and how many people have randomly shared what's happened in the past 24 hours in the Treasureverse. These are strong signals for me. What do you think? Have you done right with building this community?
Well, I think being an unknown builder and being older than most crypto participants. I mean, I'm in my late 30s. I'm probably 15 years older than a lot of people trading our NFTs. So I've failed a lot in my life. And that brings with it a little more humility where you're willing to listen to people. You have more self-awareness about your limitations. So when I co-founded the project, I knew where my blind spots were. And then people were coming in that were far more talented than me. And I was happy to get out of their way. And no one knew who I was anyway. So it wasn't like they were fighting to keep me at the forefront. And that really makes all the difference. And we brought in, it was a stroke of luck that people like Karel and my co-founder Garp, who is sort of a DeFi wizard. And we've brought in artists who, the animator for Small Brains was doing commercials for the World Cup before this. And he was just passionate about what we were doing. And then that was all just luck that the community came in. But we're all just very passionate and fired up about this. I personally think that these NFTs, we've kind of just entered into a second renaissance where we're building a new version of the internet where everything will be anchored through Web3. All of our identities, that we'll have such attachment to the badges and the non-tradable NFTs that represent our accomplishments and our connections that eventually Web 2 will just be completely reconstructed where, you have these brands that are absorbing all the kinds of industry rather than industries popping up and then inventing brands to sell their things. It'll just be a total inversion of everything that we've known before, like how brands are formed, how industries are built. And I have that passion, and most of the team does as well. And I think that kind of can make an electric environment for other people to come into.
Really fascinating, and it's useful and makes a lot of sense. If people wanna learn more and perhaps join the community, where they can they find you guys?
Yeah, so I'm personally on Twitter at 0xkarel. Our Treasure account there as well is treasure_DAO. We have a thriving Discord. I think we have 30K members there, which is kind of growing over time. That's discord.gg/treasure_DAO, one word. So you can find all of us there, the entire team. We have really engaged community members and mods who step in and help out. And, anyone who wants to come in and get situated, we can definitely help you out. And I think the other big part is, we have, just contributors who have built incredible resources around education for all of the Treasureverse as a whole, but also for each and every one of the individual games as well. So it's there's really good starting points. I will call out one community initiative called Magis. They're kind of a educational sort of institute that they're forming, and they've created this website called startwithmagic.com, which I think is a really good primer for folks coming in.
If you, after 7 months after you started the project, have people building education websites around the project that you've built, you've done something right. So I can only commend you guys for that. Where can people find you, John?
I'm on Twitter also, jpatten, PATTEN _. But yeah, just to echo what you just said, Nico, I mean, Battlefly, which is one of the games building on top of Treasure, I think they closed like a $12 million deal last month. And seeing that was just kind of one of those like out of body moments for me that, these people building on top of us were doing these enormous raises. I still can't believe it.
Fascinating. All right. Well, I, for one, am very excited about what you guys are building and where the whole Treasure ecosystem ends up. And yeah, if the vision that you have will come true, because there's never certainty around that, of course. But I mean, you've done a lot of things right, and you've achieved a lot in a short time. So I'm very excited to see where this goes. So yeah, Karel and John, thank you so much for joining. This was a great talk, and on the edge of weird, which people usually expect when they look at this and don't see any faces and they see avatars. So I guess that was expected. So yeah, with that, I think just thanking you for being here, and then listener, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, feel free to give us stars wherever you listen if you can, or a thumbs up. Yeah, if you want to talk about this more, please join our Discord. And yeah, with that, the Metacast is out, and we look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Cheers.